Okay, since I see there is more people who joined, we can start. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. There's a lot of people with different timings here. Uh, First of all, I owe you all an apology for disappearing for so long. So it's good to be back. And my apologies again for this hiatus. I know I did not share much. I did not present much stuff, but it was a very busy, very long period. So without much delay, we will continue with this presentation. And again, a small reminder. This is not the usual kind of presentation because there's a lot of text. I'll not just be reading text off slides. You can just do that yourself. You can save yourself time. You can consider this more of a Q&A. If you have questions about anything that you have already prepared, you have a question about any slide, uh, please stop me at the end of the question because every question will have multiple slides answering it. And the end of the question, I will stop. I will ask each of you or all of you if you have any questions, then we can discuss that particular point before jumping to the next question. I think we have 5 or 6 questions max to answer in this presentation. And a short reminder of the previous presentations in the beginning. So let's start then without further delay. The point of this presentation is to basically assess or discuss most common QC issues and how to really handle them in an effective way that will present good evidence to the customer that really your issue exists or doesn't exist, and how to really deal with that issue. So, quick recap. Few slides will be a quick recap. Now, again, for a start, remember that when you use the manufacturer ranges for the QC, it's very important to remember that these are just meant to be for temporary use. When I start with the QC lot, I did not establish my QC limits and means yet. So I have to use the manufacturer ranges just to make sure that I am okay in the period where I'm establishing my lab means and lab limits. They are not meant to be used for the entirety of the lot. That's one thing. Now, a lot of customers, they will tell you, okay, I want to apply WestGuard rules. I want to have better control over my QC. I want to have higher quality of results. Please remember a very important point. WestGuard rules are usually not meant to be used with manufacturer ranges. They are meant to be used with lab means and lab limits, not with manufacturer ranges. If you apply WestGuard rules with manufacturer ranges, then, well, I have bad news for you. You are going to suffer for a good while, if not all the time you're working with this customer. We will come to the point where I will show you how do you really use WestGuard rules the proper way. Sorry, internet connection. A small reminder, how do I establish my lab means and lab limits? Usually I will have at least 20 runs per level over 15 to 20 days. Try not to go below 10. The less the number of days where you establish your lab means and lab limits, the tighter your lab limits are, which means you will definitely have more outliers, which translates to more visits to the customer, more complaints, more dissatisfaction, even though you don't really have a genuine problem. It's just the way you have started things is what led you to this apparent issue, which is not really an issue. And this has to be done for every new lot of QC. Every new lot of QC, I have to establish my lab means and lab limits. Spread 20 runs per level over a minimum of 10 days. Try to not minimize that unless absolutely necessary and expect problems when that happens. Now, one tool that we have discussed before is MyExpertQC, which is really an externalized internally quality control tool. What do I mean with externalized? I simply take my QC values and I compare my QC values on my Compact or RMax or whatever it is with all the users of the same QC lot. Basically, what I'm trying to see here or do is compare my performance to other labs using the same lot. Am I reading higher than everyone else? Am I reading lower than everyone else? So I am assessing the accuracy in this regard. Another point that I can assess is how precise I am. Is my SD too high compared to others? Is my CV high compared to others? So it's a very good tool to tell you where do you stand compared to other laboratories. So it helps you if you have, for example, problems with the proficiency testing, you want to increase the performance of your lab. make sure your performance is really good compared to others. It's a very good tool, and it has its uses. We will come to that. So this is just a summary of how the externalized IQC works. We have been over that, and you have the graph here. No need to discuss it much further. Now, small reminder, because this is very important for what's to come. The two most important things that I want to get out of my Expert QC, which is the AI QC tool from Stago. Two parameters or two measurements, PRI, which is a precision index, and TRI, which is a true-ness index. PRI is simply an indicator of precision, as you see. TRI, to be more accurate, to be more specific, is an indicator of bias, an indicator of trueness, so to speak. Okay, so TRI tells me how biased I am compared to all the other users of this QC lot, and PRI tells me how precise I am compared to all the other users of this lot. TRI is acceptable between -2 to +2. PRI should be between 0 and 2. You cannot have a negative PRI. You don't have a negative standard deviation or negative CV%. That's why PRI can never be negative. Now, this is just, to tell you that basically my Expert QC really is not really a free service, and you require a license. Now, we can discuss that on an individual level, on an individual country level, but this is just for your information. We will skip that part. You can read it yourself. Now, again, a small detail. For my Expert QC, one of the things that I hear is, I don't want to use it because there is too much data entry. Now, there is too much data entry if you enter the QC values one by one. Of course, it will be an absolute nightmare to work with, but that's not really the case. For my Expert QC, and I have created a very simple guide on how to register, how to use it, all the way on until when you get the report. For my Expert QC, all I need is the mean value, the number of runs, and the standard deviation, and the lot number. And that's it. I can get a report for that particular parameter. I don't need to enter each and every QC value. Otherwise, no one will ever use the service, no matter what. Another better way is, if you have a QAG Expert in that particular site, you can just pull a small file from QAG Expert, go to my Expert QC, import that file, and that's it. You don't need to enter even a single value manually. So if you have QAG Expert, my Expert QC is super easy. The whole work that you have to do maybe not take 2 minutes. Pull out a file from QAG Expert, go to my Expert QC, log into your account, import, done. That's all the work you have to do. But other than that, even if you don't have QAG Expert, the data entry should not take you more than, say, 5-10 minutes if you are running routine tests. So it's quite simple. You don't have to enter individual QC values. Now, starting with the issues that you might be facing or you definitely have faced. Customer tells you, my QC is within the manufacturer ranges, but it's a little higher or a little lower than the manufacturer target. We are not happy with that. We have a bias. We want you to investigate. Maybe the needle is leaking, maybe this, and then the theories start. Now, please remember something that I always say. QC is numbers. QC is objective. So there is not much room for subjective opinions on how this works, how that works. You have numbers, you can work off the numbers. Numbers don't lie. Numbers are very easy to work with. Numbers say this or that. There is no in between, really. So do I have a bias? Yes or no? Am I reading higher or lower? Yes or no? Now, if you remember previous presentations, there is no room to repeat all of those details. Please remember, first of all, that the manufacturer ranges are just ranges. You don't have a manufacturer target. The target value that you see is just a mid value. It's just the value that falls between these upper and lower ranges. It's not a target value. It's not meant to be a target value. There is no such a thing for QC. So if you are slightly lower or slightly higher, that is actually expected. You are usually not very likely to be exactly on target all the time. That's not normal. That's not realistic. So remember, first of all, customer says that, what do I tell them? I tell them exactly the part that I have just mentioned to you, that QC ranges are just ranges. As long as I'm within them, I'm generally okay. I did not say I'm perfect. I said I'm generally okay. Okay. Customer says, fine, but I want to really see if there's a problem or no. Maybe there's a problem. Maybe there is. That's what we are trying to find out. So the second step is we have to make sure that we're working with our lab means and lab limits. Customer says, fine, I have already established lab means and lab limits. Now I see that my readings are slightly higher or slightly lower. Okay, then what do we do? How do we verify if we really have bias or no? The best and easiest way is to use my expert QC, because my expert QC tells you the following. I take the QC from my analyzer, okay, my QC results. I put them in my expert QC. It tells me, yes, you are reading higher than everyone else. Yes, you are reading lower than everyone else. Is this higher or lower reading acceptable? Is it an acceptable difference or no? How do I know? I just look at the TRI. If my TRI is between -2 to +2, that's it. My case is closed. The question of the customer is answered. No matter how good this customer is, no matter how their experience with the quality, once you have objective evidence, which is in this case the TRI, your case is pretty much closed. We don't need to do comparisons. We don't need to ask service to come. That's it. You have just closed the case, okay? Because once you want to dive deeper without having this TRI with you, without having objective evidence with you, you can basically change every spare part, everything in the analyzer without solving any problem, because no problem really exists, okay? So this question is very common, but you can very easily answer it with these 3 steps. Now, before moving to question 2, do you have any questions about question 1 itself? Or should I move on? No questions? Okay, then I'll move on. Now, question 2, which will be quite interesting. Customer says, my QC is within STAGO range. That is, the customer is using the manufacturer range, but we are failing the Westgard rules. The most common one that you will face, there's a rule called 10x, which is 10 consecutive runs on one side of the mean. These 10 consecutive runs can be 5 runs on normal, 5 runs on pathological, a sum of 10 runs. So the customer says, my 10x rule is violated. This is the most common one that I have heard. Okay, how do you deal with this case? Westgard rules, Westgard rules are Westgard rules. How do I answer this? Again, remember to tell the customer that, first of all, you're using manufacturer ranges, and there is no such a thing as a target value with manufacturer ranges. Okay, that's established. We will not keep repeating this point, because I think by this point it's drilled in your heads. Very important point with Westgard rules. Applying them to manufacturer ranges in most cases is wrong. Westgard rules are not made to be used with manufacturer ranges. We don't have the time to get into the very deep details for why that is. But they are generally very, very poorly performing with manufacturer ranges. It's not the fault of Westgard rules, it's the fault of applying Westgard rules where they should not be applied. Okay, then, what can I do? You tell the customer, first of all, before you apply Westgard rules, you have to have your lab means and lab limits established. Once you have that, then you can apply Westgard rules. Fine, customer accepts that, but then they still tell you, okay, I have a problem. Now, there's an even more important point. I don't need to apply all Westgard rules, and we will come to this. If the customer calculates their lab means and lab limits and they just apply all Westgard rules, how do I know which Westgard rules should I apply, which ones are really needed, which ones are really not? A lot of customers, they think the moment I use Westgard rules, I have to use all of them. That's really not the case. Okay, I just need to use some of them. Depends, there's a way for us to decide. We will come to that point. Now, if I discover that, yes, I use Westgard rules properly, I'm using lab means and lab limits, and yes, there's a problem. In that case, I need to see, is there really a genuine problem? Do I really have an issue with my analyzer? Do I really have an issue with my reagents? Or no? So in this case, again, we go back to my expert QC, TRI and PRI give you the best idea about what's going on really with your QC. Again, TRI tells you about bias. Do you really have bias? Is it significant? PRI tells you about your precision. Do you really have a problem with the precision? Because some of WestGuard rules check for bias, some of WestGuard rules check for precision. So TRI, PRI, that's good. Hello, doctor. Yes, I assume you have a question. Dr. Irina.
Hello, Mr. Late.
Hello, doctor. Good afternoon.
Nice to see you again. Mr. Late, my question is regarding just, it was a little bit early, I know, but how to decide which rule to use? It was very interesting for me, really. Like, if not to use all 6 rules and additional rules, like how to decide which exactly to use in this case?
I will come to that in detail.
Sorry, yeah, no, I was typing, but I didn't plan to make it so fast. I'm sorry for that.
No worries.
Yeah.
It's okay. I know this is an interesting question, especially that it's not something that's usually easy to find when you look for it, say, on the internet or in many resources. But I will cover that briefly.
Really encountered this very often. So thank you. Thank you.
Yes, yes. You're welcome, doctor. So once I have my TRI and PRI, I can pretty much close this case. If TRI and PRI are out, then I can begin a different investigation. I can check my reagents, check my machine. That's a totally different story. Sorry, yes. Now, going back to step 1, I said WestGuard rules are only applied to lab means and lab limits. But there's a very important point also. Which WestGuard rules do I really use? Should I just use all of them? Isn't that better? Will I not be catching more errors? No, this is not really how it works. Now, if you go back to one of CLSI documents, if any of you is interested in reading that document, I can find a way to share it with you. But the way we decide on what WestGuard rule do we use or not, there is something called a sigma metric. Maybe you have heard of 6 sigma, 5 sigma, all of this stuff. Now, it's a very broad field. That's not the time to discuss it at all. But the sigma metric is a simple calculation, somewhat simple, not really that simple. It's a simple calculation that based on the outcome of that calculation, we can tell what WestGuard rules do we really need and what WestGuard rules do we not need. And that can be done for each parameter separately. So what do I really mean with the sigma metric? Now, sigma metric equals total allowable error in percent, okay, minus bias in percent divided by CV percent. There's another version where it's done in not percentages, but in absolute values. We will stick to percentages to keep it simple. Now, first of all, what is total allowable error? Total allowable error is the sum of all error expected in a parameter. That includes trueness or biases, and that includes precision. Okay, so total allowable error from the name, total error is all the error that I expect from my analyzer or my reagents, etc., in terms of bias and the precision at the same time. That's why we call it total. Where do I get this from? You can get it from many different resources. That's one of the issues. Which resource do I use? The customer has to decide. One of the more famous sources for total allowable error is CLIA, C-L-I-A. Okay, there is different resources. There is RCPA, there is CAP, there is this, there is that. Again, it's the customer duty to decide what source of total allowable error do I use. So for example, for PT, what is the total allowable error? From CLIA, it's 15%. From other sources, it can be 8%. From other sources, it can be 10%. Which one do I use? The customer decides which one to use. That's up to them. That's their duty. We cannot tell them which one to use. Okay, then. So total allowable error minus bias percent. Where do I get this bias percent from? Now, bias percent basically is how far is my readings, are my readings on average compared to the true value of the test. So for example, for person X, PT should really be, for example, 13 seconds. This is really how their coagulation system functions. My machine reads 13.5, okay? Now, it's impossible for me to know with absolute certainty how much is the PT for this patient, okay? The true actual value of the PT is impossible to know. There's always some error in our measurement. An error in the aspiration of the machine, error in the incubation, error in the reagent. There is always some error. So bias tells me how much is the difference between my actual result and the true value. We can never know the true value. Now, CLSI tells you, because it is sometimes really difficult, if not impossible, to really know bias, we put it as 0. Again, CLSI tells you, because sometimes, if not impossible, it's very difficult to know bias, we just put it as 0. Fine. So we say bias is 0, total allowable error. We have sources where we can bring it from. Okay, how about CV percentage? Now, CV percentage can be easily calculated from your QCs. Now, as you know, CompactMax, RMax, QuagExpert, they give you summary calculations by the end of the month, for example, or by the end of 2 months, 3 months. So you can take, for example, for the last 6 months or last 3 months, whatever you have available at the time, or the last 1 year if that's available, you can take your CV percent, okay, throughout the whole year for PT. So for example, my CV percent for my PT across multiple lots is on average, say 2%. So in this case, how do I apply the sigma metric? I know the CV percentage. We said bias percent is set to 0, as mentioned in CLSI. Total allowable error, for example, I took it from Clio. So PT, the total allowable error is 15%. I will put 15% minus bias, which is 0%. So 15 minus 0 is 0. 15% divided by CV percent. CV percent, we said for PT in our case, let's say it's 2%. So I divide 15 by 2. This gives you 7.5. What do I do with the 7.5? Now, this is just an example that I gave. Now, the number I get, 7.5, or just like from the previous slide, 3.75, or whatever it is. What do I do with this value exactly? Now, if you notice, I'll just put a pointer. Yes. If you look at the bottom of this graph, there is a 3 sigma, there is 4 sigma, there is 5 sigma, and there is 6 sigma. So let's say I got 7.5, okay, in the previous example that I gave you. 7.5 equals more than 6. 7.5 is more than 6, right? So it's in this category. And the 6 sigma, we don't have 7 sigma, we have only 6 sigma. So 7.5 is higher than 6 sigma. So what does that tell us? What do I do with this information? 7.5 more than 6. Fine, what do I do with this? Now, if you look above the 6 sigma, it says 13S. Okay? What that tells me is that the Westgard rule that I need to use is 13S only. What about the others? There is 22S, there is R4S, etc., etc., etc. No. The moment I exceed 6 sigma, the only Westgard rule I have to use is 13S. Why? What's the reasoning? Why did I leave the other rules? Now, when I say I have 6 sigma or 5 sigma or 4 sigma, the higher the sigma number, the less is the amount of errors expected in my PT test, for example. Okay, so when I say, for example, my PT test is performing within 6 sigma, this means I only have 3 errors per million tests, which is a very, very high standard of testing. Okay, so basically what happens, I have a very good performing test that I am very unlikely to encounter errors. So I just need one simple rule from Westgard to catch any major errors, which is in this case 13S. Now, you can think of it this way. Suppose you have a building with fire alarms, let's say, okay? If you have fire alarms which are very, very, very sensitive, they are very good at detecting fires, okay? Maybe I just need to check them, say, once a year. I don't need to check them every day because I know they're very good, they're very robust, they're very reliable. I just need to do for them, say, PM once a year, periodic maintenance once a year, because I know they're very good, they're very reliable. So no need for me to test them every day, okay? Otherwise, I'm doing too much work. I'm checking so many things unnecessarily. I'm wasting my time, wasting my resources. And I know that if there's a fire, I am sure to be able to detect that fire, okay? There's only 3 fires per million that I will miss, which is a very, very, very small number. However, mind you, if I am, for example, performing at a level of, say, 3 sigma, okay, let's assume that is 100,000 errors per million. So you're talking about 1 in every 10 measurements is wrong. For example, this is not the actual number. I'm just giving you examples. So if 1 of every 10 fires will not be caught, that's a big problem, right? So I have to make sure that I am checking my fire alarm, fire sensors a lot, okay? Because there's a lot of chances for them to have issues. So I need to check them all the time. This is what happens with you here in Sigma. If a test is performing at a lower sigma number, this means there are more chances of error in this test. You are more likely to go out of range. You are more likely to have biases. You are more likely to have issues with the precision. So I need to have more checkpoints. I need to have more ways of checking my QC to make sure that I catch all types of errors. Okay? So it's the same principle as the fire alarm. The worse the fire alarm is, the more I need to check it. The more I need to verify, is this, for example, working? Is it reliable? Is there electricity reaching to it so it can work? Etc., etc., etc. So the less is the sigma number, the more rules I have to use, because my test performance is worse as the sigma number falls. So I need to have more rules to catch more errors. Okay? But when I have a very, very, very good performing test, I just need a very simple rule to catch any major errors that happen, because errors are very rare. That's why the higher the sigma number, the less Westcott rules that I need to use. So if we go, for example, to the previous slide, we did the calculation for the sigma metric. It gave us 3.75, okay? Then I will go to this guide, to this graph. By the way, this graph comes from Westcott website. 3.75, where does it fall? 3.75 is less than 4, so I fall in this category, the 3 sigma category. 3 sigma category says, okay, what do I have to use? I have to use the 8x rule, the 4.1s rule, the R4s rule, the 2.2s rule, and the 1.3s rule. 3 sigma means my test performance is very bad. I am expecting a lot of errors that I need so many checkpoints to catch any possible errors with my test. That's why I need more Westcott rules. The more the Westcott rules are, okay, the more I am likely to catch errors. But if there are very, very little errors, the more Westcott rules I apply, I'm catching non-existent errors. So if my test is very good, the performance is very good, I don't need so many Westcott rules. Otherwise, I'll be running behind non-existent problems. For example, if you have a mall in a very safe country, and you have 300 security guards. Why do you need 300 security guards? The country is very safe. There is no problem. But if you live in a country that's very dangerous, there is too many problems, too many troublemakers, let's say. Okay, maybe it's warranted to have too many security guards. Okay, but if you have 300 security guards in a place where the country is very safe, then maybe the security guards themselves will start to catch people at the smallest problem. Someone, for example, threw garbage on the floor. Oh, they will detain this guy. It doesn't make sense anymore. That's how sigma metrics work with Westcott rules. We don't just implement all Westcott rules blindly. Otherwise, it's a recipe for more problems, more corrective actions, unnecessary ones. Now, a small idea about how these rules work, because a lot of customers, they apply them incorrectly. When I say 4.1s, 4 means the number of runs always. The first number means the number of runs. The number after it is something that says how the rule works. So here 4 means 4 runs. What about these 4 runs? 1s. So 4 runs that exceed 1 standard deviation. Does that mean 4 runs in 1 level or 4 runs in 2 levels, or how does it work? 4 runs is the total number of runs. Okay, so 4 runs, they can be divided in 2 levels. So 2 runs normal, 2 runs pathological. Okay, the total number of runs is 4. 1s means that 4 runs consecutively in 1 level or over 2 levels, 4 runs in total have consecutively exceeded 1 standard deviation. So for example, if you look here, I have 4 runs in 1 level that have exceeded 1 standard deviation. This alarms me that I might have bias. Okay, so that's about 4.1s. How about 8x or 10x or 12x? Depends on the number of levels that you are using. So 8x means I have 8 runs. What does x mean? X mean on one side of the mean. So 8 runs consecutively in 1 or 2 levels, total of 8 runs. So they can be, for example, 4 runs in normal, 4 runs in pathological, or 8 runs in one of the 2 levels, 8 runs in only normal. 8 runs on one side of the mean. So all the 8 runs, one after the other, are on one side of the mean. That also is a possible indication of bias. Now, how do I decide 8x or 10x or 12x? There is either, let's say, I use 2 levels of control or I use 3 levels of control, okay? If I use 3 levels of control, I can use rules which are multiples of 3. So for example, I can use 9x, or I can use 12x, or I can use 6x, for example. 8x, 10x, 12x can be used if you have, for example, 2 levels of control or 4 levels of control. Okay, but the number has to be a multiple of those levels of QC that you have. If I use, for example, 4 levels of a QC, I can use the 8x rule, I can use the 12x rule, because they are multiples of 4. So that's how it works. The lab decides, because the lesser the number, the more likely I am to find biases. Because, for example, if you use a 4x rule, you are much more likely to find 4 runs in a row higher than the mean than you are to find 12 runs in a row above the mean, for example, or below the mean. Okay. Now, one very important point that customers miss about 1-3S rule. 1-3S rule, fine. If there is one run that exceeds 3 standard deviation, that's it, the rule is violated. Please pay attention though. 1-3S rule is valid and you can use it if you are using your ranges as 3 standard deviation, not 2 standard deviation. Now, as you know, most customers, they use 2 standard deviation as their range, not 3 standard deviations. Okay? So if I'm using 2 standard deviations, the moment I exceed 2 standard deviations, for some customers, they use that as a warning rule. Even though you can expect, one run out of 20 to be outside of 2 standard deviations. So that's not a rule that's commonly used. So 1-3S is a rule, again, that is appropriately applied if you are using 3 standard deviations as your limit, not 2 standard deviations. That's a very important point. Okay, how about if I'm using 2 standard deviation as my limit? You can use a rule that is 2 runs consecutively outside of 2 standard deviation. That can be either 2 runs in the same level. So I run, for example, level N 2 times. Both times are out of 2 standard deviation. Westgard rule is violated. Or I run N and P. Both N and P are higher than 2 standard deviation on one side. So for example, both N and P are higher than 2 standard deviation, or both N and P are lower than 2 standard deviation. Okay, that's how it works. How about, for example, if I run N is higher than 2 standard deviation and P is lower than 2 standard deviation. This is a rule that's called R4S. R stands for range. So this means that the range between 2 consecutive measurements, either in the same level or 2 different levels of QC, the range between the 2 runs, consecutive runs, for example, the 2 runs that I did this morning, not one from yesterday, one from today. The difference between the 2 runs is 4 standard deviations. The moment I exceed 2 standard deviations for N, for example, and the moment I drop below 2 standard deviation, the negative side that is, okay, the difference is higher than 4 standard deviations, right? Because target plus 2 standard deviations, target plus, minus 2 standard deviations. So I have 4 standard deviations in my range. If one run is higher, one run is lower, then I have definitely exceeded the 4 standard deviations of difference. Okay, so this rule basically tells me that I have problem with the precision in my analyzer, possibly. I need to investigate, okay? So that's how these rules generally work. These are some things that some customers miss sometimes. Now, I left you this link here. This is a good read about Westgard rules and how they are implemented. I would recommend you to go over that before, talking to the customer about Westgard rules, because it gives you more details that I cannot really explain very well just through a presentation. Now, if I have applied my Westgard rules, okay, and I suspect that I have problem with the precision, or I suspect that I have problem with bias, now, please keep in your mind that Westgard rules are not diagnostic of a problems. They are meant to alarm you that there are possible problems, okay? A Westgard rule tells you that maybe you have a bias, investigate, check. It doesn't tell you you have certainly bias, okay? You need to investigate that and confirm it through other means. Now, what is the best tool that I have that is, easiest and gives me the best evidence, generally speaking? It's easier, for example, than comparison between multiple sites. You don't have to take samples and run them between multiple sites. MyExpertQC, because it tells you TRI and PRI. It gives you an idea about bias. It gives you an idea about precision. If TRI and PRI return good results, okay, I can say that whatever Westgard rules found, it doesn't really exist as a problem. There is no actual problem, okay? Maybe I can check a little more. If there is really no problem, we tell the customer, that's it. We have evidence that tells us we don't really have a problem. We can continue our operation as normal. Now, before moving into question 3, does anyone have any questions about the second question that we discussed? Any point that is not clear that you wish of me to repeat? Yes, Salim.
Yeah, hi Laith. How are you?
Hello, Salim. Ya ahlan, ya ahlan.
For the 5 Sigma or 6 Sigma rules, or in general Sigma rules, some labs and hospitals, depending on the accuracy, depend the rules. So, what do you think about that?
What do you mean exactly, Salim? I'm not sure I understood your question.
Some customers need to apply more rules to get more accuracy. Let's say when they didn't have any issue, they are not depending on 6 Sigma rules only. So what do you think about that? Depending on the our method in Stago, for the clotting method, for example. Is that acceptable for that or not?
See, when you are applying the Sigma metric, Salim, to know which Westgard rules you have to use, that first of all has to be applied one test at a time. So you have to calculate this Sigma metric for PT, for PTT, for fibrinogen, for D-dimer, each of them separately. That's one thing. Now, applying more Westgard rules does not mean you will be more accurate or you will catch more errors. Now, always when you work with a QC, there must be a balance between catching too much errors that you will start to chase literally actual ghosts, okay? And you will start doing corrective actions on non-existent problems, and between catching actual errors. Too much of either is bad. I don't catch enough errors, I will report bad results to my patients. If I am too strict with my QC, for example, instead of using 2 standard deviation, I use 1 standard deviation as my lab mean. The lab will think, okay, I am more accurate. I'm giving better results to my patients. But actually, you will end up releasing almost 33% of your QC as outliers, which doesn't make sense. So if the lab uses more Westgard rules, what you will end up going through is, this test, for example, the performance is very good, okay? That I don't really need to apply Westgard rules because I'm sure about the performance of this test through other means using the Sigma metric, for example. If I apply, for example, the 4X rule, the customer says, okay, every 4 results that are higher or lower than the mean, I will stop, I will say they are a bias, I will investigate, okay? That might be a very normal occurrence for this test. That might be a very normal result. But then 4X rule is violated. What you have to go through now is, I might call the application, I might call the service, start the investigation. Okay, we waste our time, we waste our reagents. We start filing for files, corrective actions. You have wasted your resources, you have wasted your time, you have made your productivity worse, your efficiency worse. Okay, so why did you do this from the beginning? There is really no problem. Got my point? A lot of customers, they think, okay, if I apply more rules, if I do more stuff, I will get more accuracy. But this is not how it works. Even in medicine, for example, ideally, you would think if I go to the hospital, I get every test in the panel that's good. But you will end up with a lot of incidental findings. You will think you are about to die in 2 minutes. But that's not the case. That's why, for example, in medicine, they don't test you for everything under the sun. Unless there's a good indication for us to test you, that's the time we would test you. For example, lupus. I don't test everyone for lupus. Actually, it's encouraged not to test anyone for lupus unless I have a reasonable indication that I should test you for lupus. Because a lot of people will turn up actually lupus positive and they have zero clinical problems. So now I have to, for example, maybe put them on anticoagulants. Now, of course, this is not how it works, but just to give you an idea. So it's not a very good idea for the customer to do that just because they are like, okay, more WSGuard rules, more accuracy. This is not how it works. I know intuitively it sounds like this is how it works, more rules, more accuracy, but this is really not how it works. I hope that answers your question, Salim.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, anyone else has any question, or should I move on to the next question? Okay, so we will move on. Now, question 3, which is a common story that I see here and there, and unfortunately you will have to fight with. Customer says, my CAP, my recast, my ECAS, my proficiency testing is out consecutively, multiple runs in a row. What do I do? How do I work with this? Now, of course, you see this line in the beginning, if you have investigated, found no real issues, you went there, there's no needle leaking, for example, there is no valve that's not working, that is noisy. This is the obvious stuff, of course. Now, one of the very common issues that you will notice in the proficiency testing reports is that there's a lot of clerical mistakes. Not necessarily in data entry, but sometimes, for example, the wrong unit was chosen. The wrong test was chosen. The wrong reagent was chosen. For example, I had a case a while back. The customer was reporting neoptima results under neoplastine, and they were failing many times over and over and over. Of course, they would be failing. Neoplastine results are different from neoptima results. And it was a very small issue that was recurrent over and over and over. And it was just a simple mistake in them choosing the reagent. That's one thing. Another issue that I have seen more than once, customers that report D-dimer, there is DDU and FEU. DDU values are exactly half of FEU values. So our analyzer reports D-dimer and FEU. So if you report your D-dimer FEU results and their D-dimer DDU results, all your D-dimer will look like it's twice everyone else. So of course you will be out. And these occurrences are common. So always step 1, when someone complains about external quality control, make sure to check that they have really set up QC properly. They have really set up the right reagent, the right test, the right machine, the right lot number sometimes, etc., etc., etc. Now, another point that is important, make sure that the customer is handling the externally quality control samples as intended by the manufacturer. For example, CAP linearity samples for fibrinogen and D-dimer are frozen. We had a very big issue in the region that customers receive these linearity samples from CAP for fibrinogen and D-dimer liquid. They are supposed to be received frozen. So you're receiving thawed samples, which means your results will be absolutely horrible. And that was the case. So please make sure to check this point, because also you will notice that more than once, you will see that more than once in your career for sure, that it is simply that the customer forgot to do something or did not do something properly as the manufacturer of this external quality control has requested. So always make sure to check that, otherwise you will go into a bit of a deep investigation. So to avoid deep investigations, which are absolutely pointless, check this first, then we can move into next steps. So I checked everything, clerical is fine, the customer did the preparation is fine, storage is fine, everything is perfect so far, fine. What do I do next? Now, you can do 2 things simultaneously. You can check my expert QC for trueness, okay? Do I really have a bias? My results are all increased, for example, for PT, all increased for fibrinogen, all low for APTT. Check on my expert QC. Is that really a problem? Does my analyzer really read low for APTT, for example? Because if that is the case, that should reflect on your QC. If your QC is reading low, your TRI will be low, for example. At the same time, you can do the following. You can run a comparison using patient samples with a lab that is accredited with preferably the same accreditation as the lab complaining. So for example, I have lab A. Lab A has CAP accreditation, they run CAP samples. They tell you my PT is always running high. Fine. I check, oh, all throughout the last year, CAP is actually reading high for their PT. I run my expert to QC. My expert to QC says you have no problem. That's strange. Okay. So I have my expert to QC and CAP samples. Each of them, they're saying different things. You can also run on top of that a comparison using patient samples. Now, what's the goal of that? Now, if I have another lab, let's say lab B that also runs CAP, okay, and lab B has perfect results with PT. So I know that lab B, the performance is very good, okay? So I can use them as a reference, let's say. When I run comparison between lab A and lab B, both of them using CAP samples, and the comparison came out perfect, there's almost no difference between the patient results. I have proven to lab A using patient samples that there is really no problem in our analyzer. My expert QC says the analyzer is fine, and also at the same time, the comparison says my analyzer is fine. How do I know it's fine? Because I compared it to lab B that has perfect CAP results. Now we can say maybe at this stage, maybe that there's a problem with the CAP samples you are receiving, storage, shipping, etc., etc. Be very careful before telling the customer flat out that, oh, you have problem with the external quality control materials. Please be careful, because you have to present evidence that really there's a problem with the external quality control materials. If you noticed, I waited until I have seen my expert QC results and the comparison results before I started doubting the external quality control materials. Okay, so please be very careful with this point. Otherwise, the customer will tell you, no, maybe your machine has a problem. How do you prove that your machine doesn't have a problem? Maybe your reagent has a problem. Maybe. And that actually is true. Maybe really the machine has a problem. Maybe really the reagent has a problem. So it's very good to check my expert QC in this case, and at the same time to run a comparison. How many samples? Try to go for no less than 15 to 20 samples. That will be very good. At this time, we would have enough data from my expert QC and the comparison at the same time to show the customer that, see, we have a lot of good evidence that really your analyzer and your reagents are functioning well. So maybe we need to check something else other than the analyzer and the reagents. Okay, that gives the customer assurance, and usually they close the case at this point. That usually gives the customer assurance that, you know, we have good evidence, we have good data to show that your system is fine, your patient is safe, which is what the customer really wants to hear at the end of the day. Okay, before moving to question 4, any questions about point 3, question 3? Any questions? Okay, then we will move on to question 4. So this question says that the customer comes to you and tells you, my Compact Max or my R Max or whatever it is that they are using is higher than the other lab that uses also a Compact Max or R Max or whatever it is. Okay, I ran a lot of samples, I ran this sample was high, I ran it in the other lab, it came back normal. Now, please, first of all, the first step that you need to ask the customer, how many samples did you compare? If they just ran one sample, that is not a basis for comparison. Maybe that sample was compromised. Maybe the age of the sample wasn't appropriate for comparison. Maybe that sample has a certain defect or a certain problem that does not make it a good candidate for comparison. For example, if I want to compare unfractionated heparin samples, I actually have 1 to 2 hours max after the collection of the sample to run unfractionated heparin on an analyzer. If the customer says, okay, I run the first sample after 30 minutes of collection, the second run on the other machine and the other perfect lab is after 4 hours, you will not get any heparin readings after 4 hours. It will be almost zero. It will be a very low heparin reading. So it's a very bad comparison, even if they run multiple samples. So always when the customer says such things, that I ran these samples, it reads here different from there. First of all, how many samples did you run? Is it one sample? What was exactly with this sample? Let's try other samples. Maybe that one particular sample, there was a problem with collection, problem with sample, problem with transport. There can be so many issues. We cannot establish an issue or establish a pattern based on one single sample. So it's always good when the customer does this kind of comparisons to run multiple samples of the same time. Another point, how did you decide that the difference really is significant between two samples? Because, you know, usually when we compare the performance of different machines using the same reagent or the same methodology, we have usually objective criteria, total allowable error, for example, or comparison criteria. How much % is the difference? Ask the customer, because sometimes they'll just tell you, oh no, it's different. I feel it's different. There is no I feel it's different. We need to have objective criteria. It's either significantly different or no. So for example, we can use the total allowable error from Clay, or we can use, for example, STAGO criteria for comparison between different analyzers, STAGO analyzers, that is. Then we will see, is the difference really significant or no? Let's say I run 20 samples. 15 of them are really above STAGO difference limit. That's not acceptable. But if you run 20 samples, all of them are within STAGO acceptable limit or within total allowable error. But the customer says, I feel it's not good. That's it. We have objective criteria that tell us the difference is acceptable. The difference is insignificant. And by this point, you have closed the case. Okay. Let's say I checked with the customer. They did good comparison, fine. I run my 15 to 20 samples. Everything is good. Both analyzers are the same. They are using the same reagent. For example, I'm not comparing PTT Automate to CKPrest. Okay, everything was done perfectly so far. But still, I see there is some bias. Okay, the customer says, fine, it's within STAGO ranges, but I still see that this machine is reading than that other machine. In this case, it will be good to present the customer with more evidence, with more data points that, yes, okay, you feel something is wrong. I will present you with more data that it's not really a significant difference. Again, it will be good to go to my expert QC and, for example, show them the TRI and the PRI. Do you really have a significant bias or not? So if my comparison samples and my expert QC, both of them at the same time tell you that you don't really have a significant bias, you don't really have a significant problem with the precision, then I have two different data points or two different experiments that tell me I am doing well, I am doing okay. At this stage, the customer should have more than enough evidence to tell them that your analyzer is okay, your reagent is okay, what you are reporting to your patient is safe. And it's objective evidence. It's not my opinion against your opinion. At the end of the day, the patient doesn't care about our opinion. The patient and the clinician, they care about an accurate result. And this is the point. Now, one very important point that, please, you have to be mindful of. I cannot compare an automated system to StartMax. StartMax is semi-automated. And that's actually the main reason that you don't have comparison claims for the semi-automated analyzers, because there's a lot of variability that comes from the user. The user is the main variable in semi-automated systems. The way you pipe it, the pipette you use, the technician that does the work, etc., 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 can introduce a huge variability. So comparison between an automated system and semi-automated system is a very bad idea. StartMax between StartMax, not a very good comparison. StartMax say to a CompactMax, not a very good comparison. Because in this case, you would never know what is the source of variation. Is it you as a user? Is it the analyzer? Is it the other analyzer? Okay, so always when you compare analyzers, compare automated to automated. Avoid comparison to StartMax. Results should be close. Yes, absolutely. I'm not saying they should be very far apart. But you will not be able to use STAGO claims, the correlation, if you know there is a document that is the correlation or comparison limits, that's not applicable to StartMax. So please don't use it when StartMax is involved. Now, another complaint that is less common, but you might hear about it here and there. The customer says, my QC precision is not good. My QC is going all up and down on the algae graph. First of all, the QC going up and down on the algae graph, if you are using your lab means and lab limits, is completely normal, as long as you are not exceeding your lab limits. Now, precision is an objective metric. Okay, it's a metric. You cannot measure something, you cannot have a metric that's not objective. So how do I objectively assess my precision? I use standard deviation, SD, or I use CV%. There is no feeling in a precision. There is either you are precise enough or not precise enough. There is a number, SD. Is the SD below the manufacturer claim? Is the CV below the manufacturer claim? That's it, I'm precise. Is my SD and CV above the manufacturer claim? That's it, I have a problem with the precision, okay? So feeling doesn't really have a place with the precision. Customer says, I feel, I don't feel. Okay, show me your standard deviation and CV percentage. Is it with the manufacturer claim? That's it. You can keep your feeling to yourself at this stage. Doesn't mean anything. Okay, so how do I go about this? So the customer, as you said, complains about all of this stuff. You can run a repeatability experiment, or what we call, a biological test sheet. So for example, you run the PT, PTT, depending on what the customer uses. If they have, for example, antithrombin, you run antithrombin. They have D-dimer, you run D-dimer, whatever is the complaint coming from. If they're just complaining about the clotting assays, for example, there is no point of running D-dimer antithrombin. They're photometric assays. So you can use common sense with this one. So you run a repeatability experiment. Repeatability experiment passes as per the biological test, which is the manufacturer claim. That's it. Pretty much case is closed. Okay? Okay, but the complaint to begin with is about QC. How do I assess that? Repeatability is fine, but the QC, the customer says, I don't like it. Look at the QC. For example, after a week or two of running QC, or at the end of the month running QC. What is the CV percentage or the SD after that long period of running the QC? Now, mind you, some types of precision issues, they don't show in repeatability. They are long-term issues. For example, the needle from time to time gets blocked and the results become bad. The analyzer from time to time, for example, has a problem with electricity. This is something that you might not see when you run a repeatability or a very quick one batch precision assay or experiment. So it will be very important for you also to look at the long-term precision, what we call reproducibility or complex precision. How do I assess that? Again, you look at the QC over 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, whatever you have available. Then you compare it to the reproducibility claims from Stago, the manufacturer reproducibility claims. Am I within the reproducibility claims? If yes, case closed, you have no problem with your QC precision. If I exceed the reproducibility claims, now you have to check. There is no one protocol. Check. Are there outliers that they forgot to exclude? For example, the vial was very old. They put an old vial. They forgot. They did not delete that run. That, of course, will make your SD and CV falsely very high. So now you need to check. Is there really a problem with the data itself? Is there really a problem with the preparation of the reagent? Problem with the analyzer? All of this stuff. So if I go to step 2 and my reproducibility fails the manufacturer claims, I need to dig into the data, dig into the analyzer. That's where things start to get deeper into the investigation. But as long as I am within reproducibility claims of the manufacturer, repeatability claims of the manufacturer, case closed. And this is the part where I mentioned to you that if all of this fails, now you have to look for other things. That's where the investigation gets deeper. That's it. Now, before moving to question 6, any notes, any comments, any questions about the 5th question? Okay, so I will assume there is no questions. Now, moving to the last and 6th question. Customer says, okay, I got a new lot of reagent. And after I put the new lot of reagent, my QC shifted up or shifted down. And this is not acceptable. You have to fix it. Replace the reagent, give me another, etc., etc. Now, as you know, different reagent lots will introduce some difference into the QC. Usually the difference is very minor. Usually it's unnoticeable. However, some difference, a minor difference is expected. And this difference is more noticeable when the lab is using their lab means and lab limits, because your limits are narrower. So even the slightest shift in performance will be noticeable to the customer. Okay, in this case, what do I do? If there is a difference and you really notice a shift after switching to a new lot of reagents, it will be worth it to establish your lab limits and lab means again. And this is an acceptable practice and recommended practice by ISO, by CAP, by CLSI, by all of them. Okay, you change the reagent lot. Ideally, you should establish a new lab mean and lab limit actually every single time you do that, ideally. That is an extra work, extra cost to the customer. That's understandable. So if they change the lot of the reagent, they see no difference in QC, they have no problem. Anyways, usually they will not complain. They will only complain when they see a difference. Okay, how do I go about that? First of all, how do I assess that the difference between two lots of reagents is significant or no? Ideally, I'll be using patient samples. Some labs, for example, they run 5 to 10 patient samples with the old lot and the new lot. They can use, for example, the total allowable error, or they use Stago claims for comparison to assess, is the difference between the 5 runs or 10 runs on the old lot and the new lot, is it significant or no? If it passes the criteria, they say fine, we will just go with our QC as normal. If they don't like their QC, they will establish their lab means and lab limits again. So that's how it is ideally done. Patient samples, I compare old lot to new lot. Does it pass the criteria that I have, total allowable error or STAGO criteria? If yes, case closed, I move on. My QC is still slightly lower, slightly higher. I establish lab means and lab limits again. Okay. Now, customer is still not satisfied. I don't like this. I want to have better way. Give me this comparison. Do that to me. Do this to me. What do you do? Now, the second best thing you can do is a MyExpert QC report, because this will tell you that this will tell the customer that, see, even when you replace the reagent, okay, your performance is still very comparable to other labs using the same QC lot. You are not really different from others. You don't really have a problem. Now, mind you, one point. When you start with a new lot, you don't have a lot of runs yet. If you want to report a MyExpert QC report, you should ideally have at least 30 QC runs when you submit the data. Okay, less than 30 QC runs, you will not have very good results. Your results, your mean and standard deviation and CV% are not really very reliable. So you need to have at least 30 runs per level of a QC when you submit the MyExpert QC report. And another point, to have a statistically solid and robust report from MyExpert QC, you should ideally have at least 12 other labs using the same lot, 12 participants. When you see the report of MyExpert QC, you will see the number of participants in the report. Now, if you have less, the report is less statistically robust, but sometimes you can still take an idea about what exactly is going on in your lab. But ideally, you should have at least 12 participants. You don't have 12 participants, which you will encounter from time to time, of course. It still is a good idea to see if I have 6, 8, 10 labs. Am I very different from everyone else, or am I still close to these other 8 or 10 labs? If I'm close to them, my TRI and PRI are good. This is an okay evidence to tell the customer, yes, fine. So you don't really have a problem. Just establish your lab means and lab limits, and you should be okay. And that usually closes the case for the customer, because now they have actual objective evidence that they don't really have an actual serious problem that they need to investigate or that might affect their patient results. And that really is the point. We need to show the customer that really the patient is not affected. If you notice in all the 60 questions that we discussed, the theme or the recurrent action that we have to do is to prove to the customer using objective evidence, MyExpert QC report, comparison results, repeatability results, CV and SD, reproducibility results, CV and SD. We are using objective evidence that your analyzer, your reagents are performing well. So we are providing you with evidence that your patient is safe, your patient is not affected. If we are failing in any of these objective measures, then yes, we'd have to investigate ourselves, which is a different story altogether. And one last point about MyExpert QC. I have created a guide that I will put in the group, the WhatsApp group. That guide shows you how do you do registration for MyExpert QC for your customer? How do you enter the data? Okay, what are the different ways for entering the data? You will see it's pretty simple. And finally, it will show you how do you get the report. Okay, once you get the report, it's pretty easy. You have your TRI, you have your PRI, case closed. That's all you're looking for usually. And that's it. It will show you how to do things one click at a time, one screen at a time. It's all screenshots to make things very clear and very easy. And with this, presentation is finished. And if you have any questions, please let me know. So 0 questions. Well, I assume that was a very simple task then. Yes, Dr. Irina.
Mr. Lai, thank you very much for your very useful presentation.
You're welcome, Doctor.
My question is regarding Sigmametric still. Do we have any departments in the lab that Sigmametric is not applicable? For example, hematology, or is there any specific differences? Immunology, hematology, coagulation?
Again, I did not get the beginning of the question. If you please can repeat.
Regarding Sigmametric, do we have any departments in the lab, like any way, like immunology or hematology, that is not applicable or less applicable?
No, not really. Usually, Sigmametric is applicable for all parameters: chemistry, immuno, coag, hematology. It's all the same. It's not something that's specific to. Actually, it's not even specific to only lab work. Okay. It's a statistical approach to how I can assess how many errors am I expecting in this test per million. the regular sigma, how many errors per million. However, the way you apply it exactly in the lab is this particular formula that I have shared: total allowable error minus bias divided by CV percentage, or SD, depending on what you have available. So no, you can apply it to hematology, you can apply it to coag, chemistry, all the same. Actually, the CLSI document where I took all of this from mostly uses chemistry examples, because chemistry, is the most commonly used when it comes to these things. There is more applications for chemistry there, more standardization.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Any other questions? By the way, if also you have questions, you want to ask them separately on WhatsApp or on a separate call, you're more than welcome. Okay, at this stage then we can stop the recording, and I guess we're good. Okay, so